forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos. This is a supplement to Chapter 1 that we just finished a few days ago. We talked about the 4 basic patches that we work with in patchwork quilting. They're the square, the rectangles, the half square triangles, and the quarter square triangles. And these can all be cut from squares. They don't have to be, but they can all be cut from squares. As we study these shapes individually in the coming lessons, you'll see how important that is. But before we get started, I wanted to tell you about the difference between the cut size of a square or any patch and the finished size of a square or any patch. In order to take a square and sew it to several other patches, you'll need to have extra room for your seam allowance, because you need to have some way for the 2 patches to stay together once they're sewn into the quilt top and then you start using it. You don't want it to ravel out because there's not very much space. And typically in quilt making, our seam allowance is 1/4 inch. This is a 2-inch square. It measures 2 inches. And we can call this the finished square of 2 inches. And this is a cut square of 2.5 inches. And these are actually the same thing, because once you take this cut square, cut 2.5 inches, and you sew it to 4 other patches, this is the size it becomes. It becomes a 2-inch finished square. So you can see I've penciled in the 1/4 inch seam allowance on here. If I put this 2-inch square in here, you can see the difference between the cut square and the finished square. So whenever you're reading anything about measurements and they say, I need a 2-inch square, well, do they need a 2-inch cut square or a 2-inch finished square? Always make sure you're talking about the same thing, because it does make a difference. This 2.5 inch square is much bigger than this 2-inch square. So if you're cutting 2-inch squares thinking that you're going to get a 2-inch finished square, you won't. You'll get a 1.5 inch finished square. That's for squares. For rectangles, we'll do the same thing. We add 1/4 inch to every side. So here is our 2-inch by 4-inch finished rectangle, and here is our 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch cut rectangle. So you see how the difference in size, and that does make a big difference when you're sewing patches together. For half square triangles, it's a little bit more complicated, but for now we'll just say you take the finished size of your half square triangle unit and you add 7/8 inches. That's because you need 1/4 inch on 3 sides, and you need 1/4 inch on 3 sides here. Remember, this is a square you're cutting in half. So what you'll do is take, this is a 4-inch finished half square triangle, so we cut a 4 7/8 inch square, which is this. We cut it in half once on the diagonal and we get 2 pieces. So this is our 4-inch finished half square triangle. These are the patches, and when we sew those together, we have the half square triangle unit. So these will be sewed together. And then once we sew them in with other patches around them, then this blue part will be your finished half square triangle unit. Because all of this is taken up in the seam allowance. And it looks bigger here because this is actually moved over. So if you look at this, it's really close. I can pick this up. If you look at this, it's roughly 1/4 inch all the way around. Same thing with the quarter square triangle. For quarter square triangles, this is a 4-inch finished quarter square triangle, and we have 4 patches in this one. For quarter square triangles, we add 1 1/4 inches to the measurement, to the square measurement, and that gets us these pieces. So you get the idea. The finished size is on top and the cut size is on the bottom. For the squares, the rectangles, the half square triangles, and the quarter square triangles. So that's just something to keep in mind, because you're going to be using that every time you make a quilt. You'll have to distinguish between a cut size and a finished size. One more thing I want to explain to you before we look at the tools, because they will let you know where I'm coming from when I'm recommending the tools for the beginners. I have two sets here of information. This top one is for rotary cutting. If you're going to do rotary cutting, that's with a rotary cutter, a mat, and a ruler. And the bottom part is for AccuQuilt cutting. If you are new to AccuQuilt or you're considering AccuQuilt, there will be some good information for you about this. Up here, I've listed the 4 common shapes: square, rectangle, half square, triangle, quarter square, triangle. And then I looked at the finished size. What finished sizes of these shapes do we use most often in our quilting? And I came up with 3: 2-inch finished, 3-inch finished, and 4-inch finished. So I have a finished size here and the cut size here. This will be available for download. Just click in the description below the video and you'll see the download. For the rectangle, I just put 3 sizes: a 1 by 2 inch finished, 1.5 by 3 inch finished, and 2 inch by 4 inch finished. And here are the cut sizes of the rectangles. Half square triangles, 2, 3, and 4 inch finished, and these are the cut sizes. You'll see I've added 0.875, which is 7/8 of an inch, to all of the 3 finished sizes. And for the finished size of the quarter square triangle, the 2 inch, 3 inch, and 4 inch, I've added 1.25 inches to each of those. So this is a good chart for you to use whenever you're trying to estimate what size you need to cut for your finished size and your cut size. Let's look at the rotary cutting now. You'll need a rotary cutter, a mat, and a ruler. The rotary cutter that I used and have used for years and years and always recommend is the Olfa ergonomic rotary cutter, the 45 millimeter. What I like about this is the blade is not exposed until you hold this and cut. The reason I like this one is the blade is put away when the rotary cutter is let go. Once you pick it up and you press on this lever, then the blade is released. So once you let go of it, it's harmless. It won't hurt you, because so many times people forget to lock their rotary cutters. So this is the one I recommend. It has a little red dot here that you can lock it so you can't open it, and then use it like this. So this is the one I've been recommending for years. And here's a tip I want to give you about changing your rotary blade. Turn it over, and this is the nut. So I unscrew the nut. The nut has a little indented part on one side. Turn it over, and it's flat over here. And that's going to make a difference when we put it back together. Put the nut over here, and then the next thing you pull out is this little washer. This washer is it's curved. It's like a little rocker. And somebody described it as a cowboy hat, that the opening is more elliptical. It's straight on 2 sides and curved on 2 sides. And I'll show you that when we put it back together again. So we'll put that in line here. Then the next thing is the rotary cutter itself. We'll just put that down because this came out, the stem in this little washer here. We take the washer out and put that next to the cutter. And then this is the blade. And be careful with it because it's very sharp. Even the dull ones are sharp. And then we have the blade and then the stem. Each time you change your blade, clean this up. Just wipe it down with a cloth or some leftover fabric or batting and clean the stem. When I replace my blade, I have a container marked used, and I just put my used blades in there until it's full, and then I toss it. Or if you want to keep the container, I take all the blades and just wrap them up with paper and tape and put a lot of things on them. So you never know what's going to happen when you throw these away. If someone might pick up the garbage bag and then get cut. So you want to make sure that these are not going to harm anybody after they leave you. Then we have the blade. This is a fairly new blade, so I'm leaving it in there. We'll take the stem, pick the blade up, and you'll notice, you can see there's printing on that side, and there's no printing on this side. The print side always goes out, so you want to be able to look at the printing. I don't know why you'd want to look at it, but it's there. So we put the stem like this with the printing showing. Then we'll put this plastic washer on next. If you are right-handed, you'll put this stem on the left-hand side of the rotary cutter. If you're left-handed, you'll put it on the right-hand side. So I'm right-handed, I'm putting it on the left-hand side. Turn it over. Now your little cowboy hat, if you can see, I can't zoom in close enough for you to see this, but this bolt here has a flat side on this side and this side, and they match the flat sides on this washer. It goes like this, and then it just sits right in there. You can see where it sits and you can't turn it. Then you take your nut, and the curved inside goes to the bolt, and you just hand tighten it. Now, many moons ago, someone said that you've tightened up your nut enough if the weight of your rotary cutter lets the blade move as you're going across. Now you can't see this, but the blade is moving. But I've never really actually used that. I just kind of feel it. If it's too tight, I loosen it. If it's too loose, I tighten it. So as long as it's cutting right, then that's fine. So this is my recommendation for rotary cutter. Now for mat, I've liked every mat, just about every mat I've had. This is a Fiskars mat. When you first open it or get it, it's very smooth, and sometimes your fabric will move, but the more you cut on it, it roughens it up and the fabric stays put. I use this color. I like these mats, but I just don't like the color on my videos. So that's why I have this one here. Really, I would just try the mat and see which one you like. For the mat size, for many, many years, I've used the 18-inch by 24-inch mat. It's simply because when I first started quilting, all I had to cut on was my kitchen counter, and this fit on the kitchen counter, and I just got used to using it. Now for the ruler. This ruler is 6.5 inches wide and 12.5 inches long. It's from Creative Grids, and it's a brand that I like, but there are plenty of rulers out there. I just suggest you look at them and see how you like using them. There are differences. The Creative Grids ruler have these circles and things on the back that make it non-slip. When you press down on it, it won't slip. It'll slide when you want it to, but if you don't want it to, it'll stay put. The markings on here are 1/8 inch markings on these long lines, and then the 1/4 inch markings go this way. Going to use those a lot. If you take a piece of fabric as it comes off the bolt, these are the selvages, this is the fold, and this is roughly 44 inches. And to cut strips from this, I always fold it this way. So I match the two selvages, and I fold up the fold to match the selvage. And this ruler cuts it just perfectly. So if you want to cut this way, you can cut this way. A lot of people like to leave it this long and use a long ruler, but as you can see, it doesn't fit on my mat. So I got used to cutting this way, and this is the way I always cut. That's why this ruler is perfect for a beginner. If we look at the chart, you'll see that for these 4 shapes and these 3 finished sizes for each shape, this ruler is really all you need. One thing I suggest if you want to buy an additional ruler, it's from Creative Grids, and it's called the Simple 7/8 ruler. It takes all the guesswork out of trying to measure 2 7/8 inches. The markings on here start at 7/8 inches, 1 7/8, 2 7/8, 3, and 4. This will make 6 sizes of half square triangles. You can cut for those. If you want to get started in rotary cutting, you just need 2 rulers, you need a cutting mat, and a rotary cutter, and some extra blades. The AccuQuilt system consists of two major components: the cutting machine and the dies that cut the shapes you need. There are 3 different cutting machines, and they're different in size and price. And for that, I'm going to direct you to a video from AccuQuilt that describes all 3 of the systems. So you can start doing your research and look for the systems that include bundles, especially the ones that include the 8-inch cube, which I'm going to recommend later, and the 2.5-inch strip cutter. So if you look in the description below the video, you will see AccuQuilt cutting machines, and there's a link to their video which describes all 3 machines very well. Before we talk about which dies I'm going to recommend for the AccuQuilt cutting system, I want to show you what these dies look like. This is from the 8-inch cube, and I'll explain that. This is the half square triangle 4-inch finished. And it has 2 half square triangles on here. If you can see, this blade goes right down the middle. So it cuts 2 pieces, just as if you were cutting a large square and cutting it in half once on the diagonal. So you'll get 2 patches with 1 layer of fabric. With these dies, you can layer up to 6 layers of fabric. So if you put 6 layers of fabric on here, you will get 12 patches off of this die. And this is the quarter square triangle die for the 8-inch cube. This is a 4-inch finished quarter square triangle. And you'll notice that these corners are cut out. And that's going to help you later because you don't have to trim the little nubs off when you piece these together. And what I do with most of my dies is I'll measure a 1/4 inch all the way around the die, and I mark it with this Sharpie marker. Then I measure between the Sharpie markers and I write my numbers here. So this is 6-inch and this is 6-inch. I would cut a 6-inch square to put it on top of here, and that will give me 4 patches for this quarter square triangle. The same thing with the half square triangles. I've measured this distance is 5.5 inches, so I would cut my squares 5.5 inches and put it on here to cut, and then I will get 2 patches from 1 layer. Now I know 1/4 inch all the way around is probably more than I need, but that's just what I do. I'd rather cut it larger than cut it smaller. You put your fabric on top of here, say this piece. You can fold them because this is symmetrical, but this doesn't fit. So I would put my fabric here. Since I've marked the 1/4 inch all the way around, I'll put my fabric on here, and if I can just barely see those markings, I know my fabric is covering the dies that I need it to cover. So you would put your however many layers, up to 6 layers on this one, and put the mat on top, and then you would run this through the cutter, and it would cut your shapes. And in this case, it's a quarter square triangle. So that's how the system works. The blades are in here. So this is the 4-inch finished half square triangle, and this is a 4-inch finished quarter square triangle. And what the cube is, you get 8 of these dies in one box, and it's a cube. It looks like this. This is empty. These are the pieces that go in there. Here's my 2 dies, and these 2 go in here. And then here are the other 4. So that would make a total of 8 dies that fit into this cube. So the cube system all works the same way. There are 8 dies in the mix and match set. And that's what this is, the mix and match set. Keep that in mind that this is the cube I just showed you, and these are 2 of the dies from the cube. Now let's look at our list down here with the AccuQuilt, and we have our 4 most common shapes: square, rectangle, half square triangle, quarter square triangle. And here we have our 3 most common finished sizes. So what this is, for the square, if you want a 2-inch finished square and a 4-inch finished square, you can find both of these in the 8-inch cube. Here it is in like a peach color, highlighted. If you want the 3-inch finished square, you can find that in the 6-inch cube. Here are the 2 square dies in the 8-inch cube. On my dies. These are both in the 8-inch cube, so I have written an 8 here. On my 6-inch cube, I write 6, so I'll know that that goes in the 8-inch cube. It's easy to get them confused unless you really read on there. So this is the die number 55709, and this is the 2.5-inch square. So this will be cut 2.5 inches. And since this is smaller, you'll get 4 squares per cut. This number here is the die number. So this is die number 2 in the cube set. For the 4.5-inch square, this is the cut size. The die number is 55708. You'll get 1 square of each pass, and this is die number 1 in the 8-inch cube. So for the 2.5-inch cut, the 2-inch finished, you will get 4 squares off this die. And this is the 4-inch finished, 4.5-inch cut. You'll get 1 per layer of fabric on this die. Here's the rectangle. So if you want the 1.5-inch by 3-inch, you'll need the 6-inch cube. And you don't have to get the cube. You can buy all of these different dies separately. And you'll just have to check on the cost, because the last time I checked, each one of these was $45. So if you buy the cube, the 8 at a time, then you'll usually save more money, especially if you can find a special on it. So let's go back to the rectangle. So the 1 by 2-inch finished rectangle, you would need the 4-inch cube, or just that die. The 1.5 by 3-inch, you would need the 6-inch cube, and the 2 by 4-inch finish, you would need the 8-inch cube. So it goes the same way with the half square triangles and the quarter square triangles. And you see I've highlighted, there are 6 8-inch cubes highlighted. So what I recommend you to do is, if you're looking to buy AccuQuilt and you're starting out from scratch, you definitely want to get the 8-inch cube, because right out of the box you'll be able to make a lot of different quilt blocks. The next one, after you've done that and you're ready to buy something new, then I would suggest getting the 6-inch cube. The 8-inch cube and the 6-inch cube I use up like crazy. That's my recommendation for your first set of dies that you buy, is to buy the 8-inch cube and then the 6-inch cube after that. So I would recommend that you get the 2.5-inch strip cutter. The strip cutter dies are 10 inches wide by 24 inches long. And you can see some of the blades on here. This is the 1.25-inch strip cutter die, and it cuts 7. You'll see this coming up in a couple of weeks when we do another quilt. It has the lines here that you can use to position your fabric, and it also has these 30, 45, and 60 degree lines where you can cut diamonds. So you would lay your fabric like this to cut diamonds after you've cut strips. So the idea is that you take a full width of fabric with the fold on one end and the selvage on the other end, and you place it on this die over the blades, and you cut strips. You have a big mat that you put on here. You need one of the 2 larger cutting machines to use this, and I suggest the 2.5-inch because most people use that for their bindings, and you can also cut your own jelly roll strips using that. If you have an extra piece of fabric like this after a project and you want to cut jelly roll strips, put it on your 2.5-inch strip cutter and it will cut the full width of fabric. In the strip cutter, I think the 2.5-inch will cut 3 strips at a time. But you can stack 3 different fabrics and you could cut 9 strips at a time. So these have been my recommendations for rotary cutting and for the AccuQuilt if you're just starting out. These are the very basic tools you'll need. As you grow in your quilt making journey, you'll want to branch out to different things, and there are going to be plenty of tools out there for you to buy and to use, and we'll go through a lot of those as we go through this workshop. Thank you so much for watching. The next workshop we'll be talking about squares. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos.